with that, that's the review of the committee charge. And I guess that would bring us to discussion items. Mr. Chair, is there anything else out there? Any questions from the assembled group on the committee charge?
I open it up to the committee. Any questions of the general manager at this time? No questions? Let's continue on.
This is Tyler. I have a few questions.
Okay.
So I understand from reading the agenda report, and by the way, I appreciate all the staff at the Water Management District that worked to put this together and has called us together here to have this conversation in an effort to try to find opportunities for us to create some much needed housing. So my first question is, I kind of understand the limit on 75 acre feet. But do we think that it's a no-go if we try to go anything beyond that?
That's great. And as we go through the presentation, I think we'll readdress that question. I think it will be challenging for even 75 acre feet to get distributed and utilized within the time period we're talking about. So internally, us water people believe it's adequate, but also strategically, we'll describe the reason for it on one of the charts. The lengthier answer is, I don't think it's a no-go if we went higher, but we're really trying to balance a disinclination to do anything by the state water board people with a real positive inclination to do something by the state housing and community development people with what might be viewed as reasonable.
Okay, and I apologize. I didn't realize that I was thinking that was your presentation, and I'm jumping the gun here. So I'll let you finish the presentation, and I'll save my questions to the end. Okay,
great. I should note that there was an error. The eagle eye of Supervisor Adams caught that we were recycling a staff note from earlier. On page 6, it refers to the Coastal Commission's hearing on the coastal development permit as happening in August. That date is now September 17th. So at the end of the meeting, we will give Supervisor Adams the bonus prize for catching the error. And with
excuse me, I did want to mention that Marianne Leffel did join the meeting about 4 minutes ago.
Terrific. And we should express our thanks that she's joining to keep on top of these issues. It's probably less relevant to the airport than it is to the other jurisdictions, but it's always important to have your colleagues from the airport to join you. So with that, Arlene, when you're ready to put up the presentation. Stephanie Locke has been in communication with all of your jurisdictions. Some of the correspondence was included with the staff note. There's been a flurry of recent emails, primarily on county-related needs, but Stephanie is on our call as well to take questions. So with that, next slide, please. Arlene, there we go.
Isn't that it?
That's it, yep. Just
okay.
A little slow. So just by way of bringing you current, the district presented some concepts to its board in August a year ago. So it's been almost a year since this somewhat burning need was identified. And our board directed the concepts to be taken back to our water demand committee, and some decisions made as to what path to pursue. We decided to focus on determining the total need on a peninsula-wide basis. And then originally we contemplated as a board, as the district, simply creating an allocation using its existing permit regulations and so forth. The technical advisory committee, which is comprised of your staff level employees and a couple of city managers, were given homework in February 2020 to come back to us with reasonable near-term housing needs for the next 3 to 4 years. Then the Garden Road parcels in the city of Monterey, 2 sites, were advanced by the city of Monterey because of the need for immediate action, timing, and so forth. And our Water Demand Committee elected to hear a proposal for additional units that could be added to those 2 parcels that would be 100% affordable. Right before our March Water Demand Committee meeting, we received a lengthy email from Steve Westoff out of the General Counsel's office, or Chief Counsel's office at the State Water Resources Control Board, warning on how they would view the proposal for the Garden Road housing relative to the cease and desist order for water. That committee's recommendation was to drop the concept of a special allocation for the Garden Road parcels and put Monterey back in with all the other jurisdictions on kind of a peninsula-wide effort. But it came to our board in May 18th, and our board decided, no, these are 2 very good projects, and if you can almost double their size and the second half becomes 100% affordable, that it was a worthy project, and we would make water available to those 2 projects on an interim basis so they could get started, and that's what the board did. Our staff, through myself and through Stephanie Locke, have had discussions not only with the State Water Resources Control Board, both the Chief Counsel's office and the Deputy Director of Water Rights, about this issue coming forward, but we've had some interaction with the state housing and community development people. The TAC and the district's committee reviewed our what we call the ask, or our conclusion is what we think we want to go ask for, July 2nd. And then we called this meeting prior to shipping that ask out the door, if you will, to make sure that the policymakers, mayors and city council members representing the jurisdictions, are very aware of what we're asking for and what that process will be. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dig into the details of this, but on the water side of the equation, it's the cease and desist order, or CDO, which has a condition, condition 2, that says Cal-Am shall not divert water from the Carmel River for any increased use of water at existing service addresses resulting from a change in zoning or use. So even though our request went out to the jurisdictions for properties that have existing meters in place so that it would not require a new meter to be set, there is still this prohibition on an increase in use. And we've been in discussion for almost 6 years with the state board. We've gone through 3 deputy directors and a lot of staff changes. And I must tell you, they've been very considerate in trying to analyze how to interpret condition 2 in a better way. But we still have significant disagreements between the district and the state over these 4 issues. What constitutes a change in use? What's the baseline you measure against? What can be counted? And when I say what can be counted, which sources of water can be included? And what constitutes a service address? And just suffice to say, we're still in disagreement. There's been some guidance provided by the state, but not enough to get us comfortably together on how we interpret condition 2. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we got a lengthy email right before the Garden Road was to be considered. And the reason for that email is it rang the bell of what I call the trifecta. Garden Road was rezoned in order to accommodate housing. It's clearly a change in use from a commercial building to residential use. And the proposal for an increased allocation so that they could add the 100% affordable would be over and above what the previous factors would have allowed in terms of use. So it triggered all 3 of the alarm bells, and that's why the state sent an email. Next slide, please. That email in effect said that condition 2 would prohibit an increase in use at that service, those two service addresses, that the increased use of water would not be avoided, cured, or offset with the district reserve. So basically the state did not recognize the district reserve as an allowable source of water. And finally, that permitting and serving the proposed projects, even if allowed under the district's permitting, which it would be, would likely lead to a violation of condition 2. Next slide. And go ahead and just hit, there we go. So the moratorium says that CalAm, so the PUC passed a moratorium on the setting of new meters. And that decision actually did recognize that the Public Utilities Code prohibits unreasonable discrimination between like customers in the rates and tariffs. But what they determined was that the Order 9510, the 2009 CDO, and another subsequent order in 2010 did provide a basis for which they could differentiate the type of customer so that an existing customer at a site who wants to increase use could be treated differently than an existing customer at a site who did not want to increase use. They provided no guidance on enforcement, never really dwelled on how you might even measure that, but nevertheless determined that yes, you could discriminate based on an increase in use at an existing site. Arlene, is there one more bullet on this page, or otherwise go forward?
No.
Yeah. So then enters Senate Bill 330 in October of last year, signed by the governor, the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. There's Governor Newsom and Nancy Skinner, a very pro-housing, affordable housing advocate in the state government from the city of Berkeley. Also from San Francisco, Wiener is a very strong proponent. There are many, many strong proponents that have been active in both getting this bill passed and other housing related and ADU related legislation. Next slide, please. So what Senate Bill 330 says is that we're experiencing an affordability crisis and a supply crisis in housing of epic proportion, that long commutes increase health risk and safety. Lack of affordable housing is a public health and safety issue, that it's the policy of the state that local governments may not reject or make infeasible housing development projects, and that local governments are restrained from imposing a moratorium or similar restriction or limitation on housing development. Now, there are some of our own local and also outside the area planners who believe that a cease and desist order like we have on water is tantamount to a moratorium on housing. But nevertheless, Senate Bill 330 also says in its body, next slide, and it does modify the government code, basically says that a local agency shall not disapprove housing for any reason without strong evidence, but that evidence could include that there is not access to adequate water or wastewater facilities. And now it's drawing a line between facilities and the actual water is a splitting of hairs, but it seemed that SB 330 envisioned that indeed a lack of available water supply could be a reason to reject housing. So the question then to us is, do we have to go through the State Water Board? And I think the answer is that yes. There is a slim opening under this cease and desist order that the district can petition for relief. If a showing is made that public health and safety will be threatened if relief is not granted. In an early conversation with the State Water Board, it was implied that words have meaning and that relief seems to only reflect the reductions, not everything written in condition 2. But the question would be, what was the intent of that exception? And there is an April 2012 letter from the Deputy Director of Water Rights at that time, which takes a little more open view that it's not just about the reductions, but that the relief is about health and safety in general, and that the state board would retain that authority to grant that relief. Next slide. So our intention was to get the TAC to give us some numbers, aggregate those numbers, and figure out what might be an appropriate, what I call here, de minimis ask, that we could then rally some support from the housing and community development. Yeah, let's go ahead, Arlene. Go ahead to that next one. And so the letters that you saw in the packet and other conversations, a couple things came up. We realized that we underrepresented Naval Postgraduate School, Presidio Monterey, and the school districts. So we did some follow-up work with them. And at the first round, we received no response from Delray Oaks or the unincorporated county. At a later meeting, Dino Pick from Delray Oaks did participate, did see what we've done, expressed gratitude for being included in the process. And I know Stephanie Locks had some conversation with the unincorporated county as recently as today, but over the last week or so. So this represents what the initial requests were from the jurisdictions. The total was 92 acre feet. But the next slide, when we backfilled the 3 underrepresented entities, and we just simply, based on some of the needs that we knew were out there, in this particular case, we just hand-wavingly assigned 3 acre feet to Delray Oaks, 5 acre feet to the unincorporated county, and then assigned 3 to Naval Postgraduate School, go to the glasses, 6 to Presidio Monterey, and 4 to the school districts, primarily Monterey Unified, which had already expressed an interest in developing affordable teacher housing stock. That raised the total to 113 acre feet. So then we looked at a couple other allocation options. Next slide, please. Well, actually, yeah, let me back up. So then we said, well, what's really an appropriate ask? And this is where de minimis is often used to denote in both law and finance something of negligible impact, not affecting the whole. There was a time in finance where we were trying to figure out what de minimis actually meant. And 2% kind of became a rule of thumb for us. And so, again, not based in much other than anecdotal evidence, we did take a look at what production was when the cease and desist order was written. And by production, that means what's coming out of the wells, how much water is being produced to deliver to customers. And then we said, well, let's look at the last 5-year average. And the difference is 3,600 acre feet. 2% would be 72 acre feet. Let's round that off to 75 acre feet. And part of our pitch will be, we've done so well at saving water that this is merely 2% of all that savings. It's negligible and it should not be held back, despite the potential that others may say all water should be made available to the river. Next slide. So then we said, if you adjusted everybody down to, so that 113 acre feet, proportionally down to 75 acre feet, what would it look like? And that's the allocations that you see here. Next slide. And then we said, well, how would that change if we weighted by population? So here we locked in the Naval Postgraduate School, Presidio, and school districts amounts, and then reallocated everybody else by population. Well, it gave Seaside quite a bit more than they even asked for. And it moved Pacific Grove around a little bit. So then we decided to look at what weighting might be based on the AMBAG regional housing needs allocation numbers. So next slide. So this is based on the RENA goals, again, locking in postgraduate school, Presidio, and school districts, and then reallocating all the others. And what the effect of this one was, because Monterey's RENA goal is so high, it reallocated quite a bit of water to Monterey, reduced Pacific Grove, and left Seaside kind of in the same realm, and left very little for Delray Oaks and Carmel by the Sea and so forth. So then we said, okay, let's tweak this a little bit. Next slide. So we adjusted the weights by RENA to bring Monterey back down to where its request was, to add a little bit more to Delray Oaks and Carmel by the Sea. And so this was just kind of minor hand-waving adjustments. Since this time, we understand that the Monterey Unified School District decided not to put a bond measure on the ballot this November to support the teacher housing initiative. So chances are the school districts are really unnecessary for now until further notice, which means there's some flexibility in continuing to reallocate. Also in this scenario, we put back into the district reserve the approximately 5 acre-feet that would come out for the Garden Road projects that I discussed earlier. Next slide. So those allocations, and Arlene, if we can go back, let's let that burn into the eyes of our electeds represented here today. It does seem small in Delray Oaks and Carmel by the Sea, but believe it or not, 3 acre-feet could do about 10 single-family homes, and let's see, about 25 multifamily units, possibly even more. So I think as you look at ADUs or multifamily projects, trying to get 1 or 2 of those out the door in those cities, 3 acre-feet's nothing to sneeze at. Delray Oaks has a 0 allotment left over in its local jurisdictional allocation, and Carmel is pretty close to 0 as well. Monterey would have enough water to meet their stated need. Pacific Grove has less than what they requested, but we recognize that Pacific Grove also has its local project allocation for which it can designate separately water for housing. Sand City has an entitlement, so it can actually use its own Sand City entitlement for housing projects in excess of 4 acre-feet. Seaside has allocation in its pre-Peralta and public accounts. Seaside's predominant problem is getting meters set, because a lot of these were set for redevelopment agency land, and it's less easy to leverage existing meters for raw land or bulldozed land development. And then the unincorporated county, as I said, Stephanie's been in contact with the county. September Ranch has its own water supply. Any housing in the Bishop area has its own water supply, separate from what we're talking about here. And we believe that the Rancho Cañada Village's project is going to use its own offset water right from the pumping that used to occur on the golf course. So that being said, that makes the unincorporated county within the district's jurisdiction a much smaller footprint. So that's where we're at. That's our proposal to take forward as, quote unquote, the ask going forward. Next slide. So process-wise, we're at the bottom of the second set of boxes. We've gone through the process that I've described to you. We want to lock in what we are going to ask for, and then we need to develop some materials that describe the health and safety, the housing crisis, the health and safety needs, the potential exemption under condition 2 for health and safety. We want to go enlist the support of the Housing and Community Development Department first, and then petition the State Water Board for relief with support from the state housing people. and then begin the discussion process and hopefully get to a successful outcome. I think that'll take us into November, possibly even December, depending on workload and where they're at. Next slide. And this is our last slide. So what we want to do, if this is something that you're comfortable with, we will be developing materials over the next week or two. That means you as policymakers have, one more bite at the apple to come back to us and say, hey, I've been staring at these numbers. I've talked to my people. I really don't think you've given us enough, or we're very happy to participate. But we do want a coalition. We're hoping every jurisdiction signs on. We hope to expand that coalition to include the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, Land Watch, United Way, and other non-governmental organizations. And then I would like to have one or two of the jurisdictions make available to us their staff member. And I'll just give you an example. City of Monterey, Kim Cole has been very involved in this, as has Andy Flower. So, there's somebody there that is on this. I think they've had some sidebar conversations with state housing people. Maybe somebody from Seaside, don't know, but we'd like to have one or two staff members join us in this effort so that when we do the Zoom meetings or the WebExes with various representatives, we can have staff members invited to those meetings. And then at some point when this translates to our formal petition to the State Water Board, we would like letters of support from each of the jurisdictions and the NGOs. And we'll give you a heads up as to when that would be appropriate and when we're planning on filing. But it kind of goes back to that timeline I showed you on the last slide. So with that concludes the presentation. We're open for discussion. Tyler, I know you said you have several questions, so maybe we answered them, maybe we did not. But that's the ask that we're expecting to take forward, barring any major pushback from any of the jurisdictions. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair and we'll go from there.
Thank you, General Manager. Good job. Are there any questions from the committee on this presentation?
Yeah, so Dave, you did a great job. You did answer a lot of the questions. I do have a few, and it just kind of feeds on, I think, a little bit of what you were already saying. So if we wanted to include something in there about the meter moratorium, what would that look like? That
is a great point. And so I think, rather than increase our water ask, I think the big jump would be to say, if you make an exception for this 75 acre feet, and keep in mind, we're the district, we're not going to tell you you can only use an allocation for housing, but we are expecting the state to tell you we're only doing this for housing. So if they know it's limited to housing and they know they're trying to address SB 330, I think we should go to the next step and say, for this little package of water for a specific use, would you be willing to lift the moratorium on meter setting? I don't think that we would be able to formally get the Public Utilities Commission to act, but in there, because it just takes forever, it's a morass of a way to do regulation. But if the state board let's say in its decision to grant permission also said, and yes, we would authorize the setting of meters for this specific use, my recollection, and I'll reread it, is that the intent of the PUC moratorium was to take direction from the State Water Board. So I think maybe we could, bend that a little bit. If we got direction from the State Water Board, that might be sufficient for California American to go ahead and set the meters, which could change the complexion a little bit. I mean, that would certainly help in, let's say, Seaside, or just, some projects in Monterey and elsewhere. So I agree we should ask.
And just one quick comment on that too. If it could be like an additional element if they're not willing to go all the way there, where if we could look at condition 2 and say, well, if there's already meters on a commercial site that we could just reallocate if it was rezoned, as is the case with the Garden Road projects. There's meters already there. It would be nice to have additional meters, but
Right.
if there's meters already there, why can't we have the flexibility of utilizing those in commercial zones for residential uses? So just a thought there. Another question is, we're going to be deciding on an allocation per agency. Are we stuck with that once that decision is made, or is there an opportunity or a possibility to move around a little bit after?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've contemplated in two ways. One is we be the adult in the room and we give everybody a portion of what you saw on that last chart. And then we wait and see how well you use that portion. Or we give everybody their allocation with the understanding that if you're not making steady progress towards the use of that we repossess it and reallocate it if necessary. I'm not sure the best way to go. I'd rather get the permission first and then have another one of these convenings of folks and figure out what's fairest, because I do think that, even Monterey, you guys probably did the most thorough job of identifying existing parcels with meters that could move quickly. But you never know, a developer goes bankrupt or somebody just changes their mind and you don't need 20, you need 15. So it can work to the benefit. Carmel may all of a sudden come up with some plans. There's not much vacant space in Carmel that's not single family dwelling oriented. So they're more likely to see ADUs. I think in the current climate, without a sugar daddy, so to speak, none of the cities are going to be able to go in and do 100% affordable public projects. And so, I think that Carmel has a need for workforce housing, but to do it as a public-private partnership, their pocketbook, everybody's pocketbook is going to be stretched thin right now. So unless you've got a foundation or somebody else to come in, it's pretty unlikely. So I think we need to be able to work with those changing conditions. But so we'll try to come up with something that keeps it flexible. But best case, that timeline doesn't even have them giving us any signal until November/December. So we can talk again.
Okay, and then one last quick question. You were talking about gaining some partnership in signing a letter or showing support of the initiative, and I was just wondering if it would be helpful at all, even though we're not a formal group, if the Housing Coalition could provide some level of support.
Yep. Yeah, anything with housing in its name or housing in its charge, those are the folks that we want some help with. And even the, I know Matt Huerta is helping the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, but I know that there are other developers who are willing to do these projects. So even getting some of that community engaged with letters of support would be worthwhile. The one contact I've had at the State Housing and Community Development agrees that this needs to come at a high level from them. So basically high level at housing to high level at water at the state. And I don't think we've adequately sorted through the hierarchy at the housing folks yet. We do have our Sacramento consultant tasked with that. So, I think over the course of the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll learn more about housing and community development and what they're capable of doing. And then that will probably help inform what kind of letter writing we need and so forth. So.
For me, thank you.
You're welcome, council member. Any other committee members?
Mary's got her hand up.
Go ahead there,
Cool.
Adams.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I have a couple of things I want to say, and one is that I really think that you did a very fair approach to this, and I am embarrassed that the county did not respond in a timely way, and I thank you very much for ensuring that you did look at everyone, whether we were, recalcitrant or not. And I'm thankful that now I know Stephanie has been talking to the people that she needs to, and I think we've got something that we're going to be sending back very soon, which I believe will still fall fine in line with the allocation that's being presented for us. So I'm tickled with how this is looking. I am conscious, though, I think with the water meter issue, that's probably going to be a big issue in the unincorporated area. So that's something that we would want to be paying close attention to. In the interim, though, I'm really delighted that we've been able to move this forward, especially in light of all of the RENA responsibilities that each of us has. I don't think we would be able to even be talking about RENA if we didn't have the additional water allocations to work with. So thank you for that forethought.
Anyone else? Mayor Peak, go ahead.
All right. I thank you very much, Chair Edwards and Dave Stahl. Appreciate the update and the information. Just a couple things on policy perspective. Adding water for housing, fantastic. Totally in support. I'll write you a letter as soon as we get off this this meeting. Letter in support. However, I can't support the numbers that you're proposing. Pacific Grove's already sent you numbers that of water that we would like for housing, and I don't see any reason to move off of that. However, I realize that this is tactics and how you try to squeeze some more water out of the State Water Resources Control Board, and that's your business. That's not ours. So I now understand where you're coming from, though I can't support that we need less water than what we've already sent the district. By the way, about a year and a half ago, I talked with the director of HCD, Ben, and I'm looking online. It looks like he's been replaced by Gustavo Velasquez recently. Is that right?
Dave, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've only known this person that shows up on the website now. I didn't know the prior one.
Okay, so the fellow I spoke with about a year and a half ago. I traded several emails over the course of about a month with him and explained that water availability was a major impediment for housing. And he said that he would go through channels to contact the State Water Resources Control Board. And after 2-3 emails and a month, he came back and he said, no, there'll be no more water for housing. Now, you know, that was then, and now maybe there's a different climate. I wish you well on that conversation.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, to the letter, just hold your letters until we've got a timeline, and then we'll come requesting them. You can bet we'll come calling on them. So you don't have to rush off after this call to do one, because we want them addressed to the people they need to be addressed to, and work with the housing community development. As far as your numbers for Pacific Grove go, we'll set up a sidebar conversation, because we have reason for what we did based on what the request was. And so I think maybe we can just do some reality checking, and we can, we can tweak it a little bit, but we can do that off on the side, and we'll go from there. But with respect to the response from the State Water Board through the housing and community development people, we got the same response when we raised it. Dave Laredo, Stephanie, myself were there with their deputy chief counsel, the current staff counsel who's working on this, with Cal Am in the room. And we, in effect, said, hey, over there, pointing to the dome of the Capitol, every legislator is trying to find a way to do housing and streamline the ADU requirements, get rid of parking requirements, get rid of this, get rid of that. It's all about housing at the Capitol right now. And their response was, that's not our problem here. And so from that standpoint, and this is over a year and a half ago, I could understand where your contact came up against the same thing, and we may come up against that as well. But the difference I see right now is SB 330 was passed and signed in October, and that has declared it to be a crisis and a health and safety concern. That bill modified the health and safety code, which is where a lot of the affordable housing requirements reside. And so, you know, I'll be honest, this was not really on our radar screen. We're trying to solve all sorts of other water problems, not water housing problems. And it was, you know, through folks like Tyler and John Wizard and, you know, Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, United Way called us. We began to understand better this crisis, and so it's worth a shot. And as I told you, we have talked to staff. They know it's coming, so at least they haven't said don't come. But I think I can understand that response that you received.
So Alvin, this is Dave.
Yeah, Mayor Potter?
I just had a couple of observations and maybe a question or two. First of all, I'd agree with Bill's comments that the approach that what we did was maybe a little vague or capricious, or just threw a dartboard at a roulette wheel and picked a number. It's quite right. For the city of Carmel, anyway, for us to be asked to go from 10 down to 3 is more than a haircut. It's more like a decapitation in my mind. And so I think the cities did give some very serious thought to these numbers that we came forward with. I had a question regarding the Garden Road project. I think we discovered that a promise was made that the city would indemnify the district on that decision. Are we going to rehear that project again, or what is the status of that project?
Yeah, we're waiting on an indemnification agreement to get finalized. There's been a couple of drafts kicking around. Okay,
because it's a good project. You know, in the staff report here, it does mention the fact that it's unclear as to whether once a project is approved, any project, if there will be the need to have a year's worth of operations of that project going forward to go ahead and prove the viability of the project from a water production standpoint. I think some of us will remember the Peralta Well project, which is, of course, in the past and rather ancient history, but there was a preliminary allocation that was made on that to all the jurisdictions, allocated accordingly. I think it was, I can't remember what the formula was, but anyway, for the use of that water prior to the production, so we could get a little bit of a jump on it. So I think to say that the 3 to 4 years is a given might be a little bit premature. And then also, as far as the fact that this housing mandate coming down from the state level, I represent San Benito, Monterey County, and Santa Cruz County at the League of Cities. The general attitude at the city levels, national, statewide, is that the taking away of local control and local rule over how we want to plan for our communities flies in the face of good zoning and local government. I would say that resonates just about with every jurisdiction that's out there, that we all understand the need for affordable housing, but to say we're going to compromise the community's character or the quality of life by our citizens by waiving all zoning standards flies in the face of good government, in my mind.
I would agree with that one. As far as your numbers go, we can do a sidebar with you as well. Happy to do so.
Me too.
The pre-allocation issue, I think you're absolutely right. Once bulldozers have turned earth and there's actually a project being built and a high degree of confidence that it's sufficient, then I think we can head down this path of permitting more projects. We're only trying to get enough water to get through that period of time anyway. So what you're saying and suggesting is true. We would be doing a new allocation for the actual project, and we can certainly release that. The CDO won't be released, and I have had additional conversations. they probably will not need a whole year. The way the process works is California American would come forward with a letter and evidence that says we now have a sufficient permanent supply to get down to our legal right. While the language in the CDO says that the state can then turn around with a response and go ahead and lift the CDO, I've been told that there's a high degree of likelihood that they would have some sort of public hearing or public workshop on the lifting of the CDO. But it is the type of thing that if the evidence is sufficient, then it could be month 1 or month 3 after turning that switch that the CDO is lifted. So it could happen sooner than a full year of operations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I appreciate that clarification. History is a great lesson. We just need to remember it.
Hey, is there any other committee members like to comment on the presentation? Any other committee members?
If I could just get clarification, Dave, what are you suggesting the next steps then be for this body? Since we didn't meet for 8 years, I'd hate to have that much time dragged by again.
Yeah, exactly. So, what, you like more meetings than less? We'll contact Mayor Peak and Mayor Potter separately to talk a little bit about the numbers. The rest of you have a chance to kind of dwell on it a little bit, and if something comes to you, let us know. But this will be it, unless we hear back. You know, as I said earlier, maybe a week and a half to hear back from folks. Then we're going to start putting the package together and setting up meetings, and then you know, having distribution of that request. And if the 75 is the number and that's our number, then that's going to be what we're going to carry forward. I think that we still need to do a little bit of homework on who's going to be our champion at housing and community development. I don't know if it's going to be the director, Mr. Valesquez. There may be somebody in there who is, the appropriate staffer. Certainly the gentleman I've been talking to is, I won't say too low down the food chain, but for us to be successful, we've got to get their attention at a high level. And to the extent any of you know or have contacts or have had interaction, either through your staff or through yourselves personally, I'd like to gather that intel as well, so that we can make sure we don't, step on anybody's feet, or actually maybe leverage your prior relationship.
Dave, through the chair, if I might,
Go ahead.
Utilize the ledge committee that we have at the district.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was that ledge that we talked about
Exactly.
sending JEA out to get to work on this, and having a representative of our board in support.
Through the chair.
Go ahead there, Mayor.
So I think as a policy committee, if you need a vote on something, let's vote in support of asking the State Water Resources Control Board for water for housing. As a policy, I'm not sure we need to vote on a number. I'm happy to move forward at that, on that basis. I think the number is very much up to the experts, the district, to determine how best to carry that ask forward to the State Water Resources Control Board.
Okay. Yeah, it's a discussion item. So I think what we were looking for is major objections that we could go back and sharpen our pencils. So I think we've got that direction. But otherwise, yeah, we were looking for your consent to this path and just see where it leads us.
Good.
To the chair, if I may.
Go ahead there.
So I do just have some final comments, particularly in regards to the city's allocation. I know that we had originally requested 20 to 23 acre feet, and that was mainly based upon heavily impacted by the additional opportunities available through the Garden Road projects. But I'd also like to just kind of highlight and identify some of the other factors here. And an overarching point that I'd like to make in regards to the consecutive items that I will identify is I think that there's a great need to focus as much housing as possible in the city of Monterey, because that's where all the jobs are. And so if we're also trying to look at creating some solutions towards the impacts to traffic and traffic mitigation, I think it's incumbent upon us as all in a region to think about opportunities as much as possible in the city of Monterey. Also presented earlier in the staff's presentation was the fact that the city of Monterey has a higher RENA allocation, and so I think that further supports that. We also have these 4 opportunity sites that we're looking at, which we currently only have water for maybe one of the projects. And I think that if we were able to get additional allocation, then I could work with my colleagues on the council to push for more opportunity sites. I think that the opportunities are limitless. Again, Garden Road, there's a lot of opportunity there. And then we're going to be discussing at our council meeting, the first council meeting in September, about changing our ADU policies. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there as well for some of the single family residential zones that we really haven't been incorporated in the allocation that we've identified. And there's other projects out there. There's a project on Encina Avenue that has proposed 38 units. So there's a lot of opportunity. And I think that I would love to somehow find a way of getting more than just the 20 that's been identified by staff. But I also respect the work that staff has done in regards to getting us to this point. I throw out 2 more statements. One is hopefully we can include some kind of language in the request that kind of connects COVID-19 and the long-lasting effects that are going to be associated with it that affect the general health and safety of our community, particularly those most vulnerable amongst us. So I think that's a really important element to put in there when we're trying to connect it to the state legislation on the housing. And then I just kind of want to end with, yes, Dave, absolutely. Please utilize the city staff in Monterey to be part of your team as you move this ball forward. So thanks again for all the work that you've done on this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, council member. Anyone from Delray Oaks would like to have a question or answer, or are they okay?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
All right. Airport District Director Marianne, you have any comments?
Thanks, Alvin. No, I don't. We're working on an additional water supply, and hopefully some of that will come to fruition. If it does, it'll help out the entire community.
Okay, thank you, Director. If there's no other matters we have to discuss, I'd like to, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Supervisor.
Thank you. I just listening to Mayor Peak's comment about putting forward a motion for housing. I feel like we always need to have a descriptor in front of the word housing so that we do not lose sight of the fact that what we need is affordable housing and workforce housing and low income housing and some moderate income housing. But to simply put the word out housing, at least in my district, it opens it up for a lot of inappropriate projects. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Supervisor.
Who that? Okay.
I was just seconding your thank you to the supervisor, Alvin.
All right. Thank you, council member. Okay, if there's no other questions or anything, I'd like to adjourn.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you too for your time.